part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for stopping by to the Sable Brothers on the Baseline Podcast right here on the Press Play Podcast Network. We're back after having a little month-long hiatus and a little time away for family vacations and enjoying the nice weather here. So Scott and I are back and ready to go. We are your hosts, John Sable.
Definitely. And I'm Scott Sable.
Thanks for joining us, guys. Last time we were on the pod, we had Travis Fryman on, former Indian slugger and current Guardians advisor. We're going to talk some football today, and we're going to talk college football. And joining us today is the godfather of college football predictions. He's pretty much mastered the art of college football prognostication, if you will. And if you follow the sport, you likely know his name. You've seen his college football magazine on newsstands for decades. Our guest is sports researcher and writer of the world-famous Phil Steele's College Football Preview magazine. The 2023 edition is out now. We welcome Cleveland native and resident Phil Steele to the Sable Brothers on the Baseline Podcast. Thanks for coming on, Phil.
Hey, a real pleasure being on with you guys. You know, over the course of the summer, I usually do about 250 of these radio shows. I think this is the first one I've done in Cleveland all year, my hometown.
How about that? You know, it's interesting, Phil, because, you know, Cleveland is such a professional sports town with the Browns and the Guardians and the Cavs. But, I mean, high school football is huge here. College football is massive with Ohio State just down the road and some MAC schools here too. But I think in general, people haven't clicked over to the college football scene just yet.
Yeah, there are plenty of college football fans in Cleveland. It's just unusual that haven't really done a lot of shows in Cleveland this year. But I'm sure it'll be happening once we get into August. You're probably right. And you know, there's a lot of the MAC. I love the MAC, and we get the same amount of coverage in the magazine of the MAC teams, 2 full pages. Everything you need to know about them as we do on the teams like Ohio State and Alabama.
Yeah, I think, what is this, your 29th year of this magazine? Is that right?
Yeah, I started young. So it is the 29th year. 1995 was the first one. And, you know, this year I talked to 123 of the 133 head coaches. Each call took about an hour apiece. And that's in the third right-through process. It takes 7 months to put this magazine together. We start the Sunday after Thanksgiving, and it goes all the way through June 7th. And we had to move it back because of the portal. All the coaches have my number. I said, hey, you sign a player before June 7th, text me, call me on June 6th, day before the magazine goes to press. I'm getting texts from coaches. We're changing lineups. We're adding things to the thing. It made it very hectic the last couple of weeks, but well worth it. I think we captured about 95% of the portal moves because the portal closed May 15th, and I gave it 3 full weeks for us to capture all the moves. That's unreal. You say you start after Thanksgiving. Is there ever a downtime right after the college football where you can kind of take a breath? Or is this something that's you're put to the floor the entire time? Yeah, this is my fun time of the year right now. It's summertime because I'm doing maybe 5 or 6 radio shows a day or TV shows a day, and just talking football during the day. I'm doing a little bit of work. I'm down to like maybe 50, 55 hours a week right now, so it's almost like being on vacation.
I've read somewhere your preseason predictions of the 120, 30 colleges over the last 20-some years is something like 90, 92%. That's just incredible. Obviously, for someone that puts so much work into it, I guess it isn't that you're not that surprised of your accuracy if you're trying to be modest, right?
It's all I work on year round, so you better be good. But if you guys ask me about baseball or basketball, I'm clueless. I just follow college football, one sport. Do you have a ranking or a prediction that you've made over the years that was shocking to some that actually came through, something that was just complete, and it came through, and you were proud of it? Is there something that stands out since the mid-'90s? Yeah, I would say the one year I picked Hawaii, which was coming off an average year, to go to the Sugar Bowl. And everybody's like, yeah, right. And then Hawaii ended up in the Sugar Bowl that year, and it was pretty. I still do shows in Honolulu where they're like, hey, Phil, I remember when you picked us to go to the Sugar Bowl that year. We went there. We were very skeptical at the beginning, but we loved it. So that's probably one that stands out. But we've had numerous surprise teams or teams that I list as the number one surprise team, which is a non-top 10 team. I think can make the playoff, and many of those have actually made the playoff.
Now, I hope you're wrong on some of these predictions, Phil. I got to be honest. Your top rankings, your top rankings are Georgia, Clemson, Michigan, Alabama, and Ohio State in your preseason top 5. Ohio State obviously nearly won the national title last year. If that targeting call on Marvin Harrison didn't get pulled away, and then of course the field goal at the end, they're breaking in a new quarterback. Still loads of talent there. Why, in your expertise opinion, do you have Ohio State 5 in your rankings?
Yeah, interestingly, in the magazine, I've got 2 sets of rankings. One is my power poll. I have 9 different sets of power ratings I work on. I meld them all together into one and have the overall talent of the teams. I rate Ohio State number 2 in the country in the power poll, which is the second most talented team in the country. Mm-hmm. And as you correctly pointed out, John, that penalty or the missed field goal, if they make the field goal, Ohio State would have been national champs last year, because I think they would have done to TCU pretty much what Georgia did to TCU in the championship game. So they are a talented team. I don't have that many question marks about quarterback. How many first-year starting quarterbacks for Ohio State have ended up the season first team Big Ten? It wouldn't surprise me if at the end of the year Cal McCord's a Heisman contender, especially throwing to my number 1 receiving core in the country. Remember last year the running backs got banged up. Now Travion Henderson, Mayan Williams, Dallin Hayden are all there. They've got an outstanding receiving core. My biggest question mark on offense, probably the tackle spot. They lose 2 high draft picks at tackle, and I'm a little questionable about the tackles, but they're still a loaded offense, one of the best in the country. And defensively, they showed some improvement last year. I think they're going to show more improvement Jim Knowles' second year, because he has a complex type of defense, and they've got a veteran unit coming back. I really like the linebackers last year with Chambers and Eichenberg. They've got the guys up front with Tumolo and Sawyer. And the secondary should be improved as well. So it's a very good Ohio State team. The reason I've got them 5 overall is the schedule. You look at their 3 road games that concern me. They played Notre Dame early in the year, when they've got a young quarterback going on the road. And with Notre Dame last year basically had a backup quarterback all year. This year they've got Sam Hartman, one of the best QBs in the country, a loaded defense, loaded offensive line, loaded backfield, great special teams. And Notre Dame gave Ohio State quite a test on the road last year with a younger team. I think the Irish have the more experienced team this year, and that's going to be a tough threat for Ohio State. Then the week after playing Penn State, as you notice in the magazine and the power poll, I rate Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, all of my top 5. Penn State's a big game. The very next week they have to travel to face Wisconsin. I talked to you about some surprise teams. Wisconsin's my number 1 surprise team this year, or a non-top 10 team that I think has a shot at making the playoffs. So that's going to be a tough test. And then how about Michigan for the season final on the road in Ann Arbor? And the Wolverines have won the last 2. And this is probably Jim Harbaugh's best team. Well, it is Jim Harbaugh's best team that he's put on the field in his 9 years. So I think all 3 of those road games combined, and then you factor in Michigan's schedule, their non-conference slate is East Carolina, UNLV, Bowling Green, all very easy. Toughest road game is at Penn State. They won the last time they went there, and they get Ohio State at home. They have a much more manageable schedule than does Ohio State, and in my mind, a better chance of getting there.
So you have Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State in the Big Ten. Got to ask you a question about Penn State. Drew Aller, who was a quarterback in Medina a couple of years ago, this is his second year at Penn State. Where do you see him fitting in? Is he going to start? How do you see him fitting into the offense?
Yeah, and Coach Franklin's saying the job's up for the air, but he's going to start. He's your starting quarterback. Yeah. He's a prototypical pro-style quarterback. He's big. He's strong. He can make all the throws. And he's actually more mobile than you would think. He's not just a pocket passer. He can't run. He's got good vision. He understands the game. He works really hard, and he's grown as a leader. So he's a guy that's going to start day 1. And I think at the end of the year, you look at their offense, they've got talent as well. Singleton and Allen in the backfield, which teams are going to have to prep for. They also added in Treson Potts from Minnesota. The offensive line, when I went over the team with Coach Franklin, called it one of the better offensive lines he's had. So have the protection. They bring in Dante Cephas from Kent State, who is a top-notch receiver to go along with Keandre Lambert-Smith. And they've got the tight ends with Theo Johnson and Tyler Warren. So I expect Drew Aller to have a great year this year. And if they can upset either Ohio State or Michigan, which I think they have the possibility, especially the Michigan game at home, then I think he's got a chance of even being a Heisman contender at the end of the year. It's a loaded Penn State team and the best one Franklin's had.
To piggyback on your Drew Aller comment and question from Scott, Phil, I did a story yesterday for Fox 8 with the Armstrong twins over at St. Ed's, Devontae and Deontay, who are committed to Ohio State next year, 2 offensive linemen. I asked them about Drew Aller, and they've gone to, they played against him. They're 2 years below Drew Aller, but they played against him, in the playoffs a few years ago against Medina. They've seen him at camps in the years past. They saw him recently, and they told me, and Scott listened to this, they told me that Drew has put on some big-time muscle, and he's a lot bigger than he was when everyone else around here locally remembers him.
Wow. We were talking about that too, John.
Yeah, he's up to like 242 now. So, I mean, that is a good-sized quarterback.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're talking about the Big Ten, if Ohio State loses to Michigan, let's play the hypothetical game, because us in the media, we like to have to talk about this stuff. If Ohio State loses to Michigan, makes the playoffs, or misses the playoffs in this scenario, and no shot at the playoff or the championship game, do you think Ryan Day's job's in jeopardy?
I was a little surprised at the Ryan Day pushback last year after losing to Michigan for a second straight year, and I can only imagine the cries would be more after a third straight year. It seems hard to believe. I mean, this is a guy that's got a great record as a head coach at Ohio State, 45-6. He's only lost 6 games in his first 5 years, but I think there would be pressure in that respect. So. I couldn't call for it, but I would say that he'll get even more pressure than he would the year before.
So would you be putting Michigan over Ohio State in that game in Ann Arbor? I'm curious.
I do have Michigan slightly favored in the game, yeah. I've got I go through the each game all year, and I put down who I would favor, who I'd be an underdog, and by how much. I have Michigan a 2.5-point favorite in the game, which is tight. I mean, it's right there in the home field advantage is big. And in Vegas right now, they agree with me. They've got Michigan a 2.5-point favorite.
I think Caesars, like a couple weeks ago, still had Ohio State favored. That must have changed then, huh?
I think it has. I was looking at the latest Vegas lines, and Michigan was a 2.5-point favorite.
We'll have more with Phil Steele right after this.
Hi, everybody. It's John Tellage from the Guardians of the Land MLB podcast. Be sure to hop on with us to follow all the dramatic developments of the reigning American League Central Division champions. From game analysis to interviews to keeping tabs on who could be the next breakout star. We'll have that and much, much more right here. It's the Guardians of the Land MLB podcast on the Press Play Podcast Network. Subscribe here and join the fun.
The R&R podcast going to be rocking and rolling with you because football season is underway. College, Ohio State, the Power Fives, the MAC, the Browns. Michael Regai, are you ready to rock and roll with some football?
Yeah, I've been ready. This is our time of year. This is what R&R is all about. We're going to be with you every week. Kenny just said it. Browns, NFL, Ohio State centric. So you got to stay with us all fall and winter long here on R&R.
That's right. The Regai and Rhoda podcast coming to you here on the Press Play Podcast Network. Subscribe now and don't miss a show.
Hey everybody, it's Sam Amico from Cavs on the Break NBA podcast. Be sure to give us a listen for all your Cleveland Cavaliers recaps, analysis, breakdowns, draft talk, free agency. The list goes on and on. Give us a listen, Cavs on the Break NBA podcast.
In your rankings in your top 5 preseason, why is Clemson so high at 2? They've been kind of quiet the last few years. What has Dabo done to persuade you?
Well, first of all, when I talked to Coach Sweeney this year and was going over the team with him, remember the 2018 defensive line, loaded with the first-round draft picks? Everybody was a star in that unit, and it was regarded as one of the best in college football. Well, Coach Sweeney told me that this year's group doesn't have the star power of 2018, but that this group is actually deeper in talent and experience. And I agree. I mean, they got a guy in the spring, Peter Woods, a true freshman, one of the top recruits coming out of high school, dominant in the spring. And I couldn't find a starting spot for him. They've got Xavier Thomas. They've got Arroyo. They've got Davis. They've got Maskell. They got Williams. They got Page. They're just very deep, 3 deep, and very talented guys. You're going to see a lot of draft picks coming off this unit. They're loaded. You look at their linebackers, they've got Carter and Trotter are both back, one of the better linebacking combos in the country. Offensively, I think Cade Klubnik steps in and lives up to his PS number one or number one rated quarterback at a high school level. They added in Garrett Riley, who was the offense coordinator for TCU last year, did a heck of a job there. He comes in. They've got Shipley and Maffa at running back. Their offensive line's practically intact, more veteran unit, and the receiving corps is improved as well. And then, unlike Ohio State, when you look at Clemson's schedule this year, their road games are all very winnable. The toughest one might be at Miami, but that's a team they really dominated last year. The toughest two games are Florida State and Notre Dame, and they get them both at home. They've lost a grand total of one home game the last 6 years. So I think they take care of business in Death Valley. I have them favored in all 12 games this year, and that's why they're only number 6 in my power poll, which is the overall talent. But I got them number 2 in the country because I think with Dabo, those playoffs, they get there undefeated, then they've got a chance of making some noise in the playoff.
Okay, Phil, how about predictions for the college football playoff, national championship, Heisman? We talked about a few names already for Heisman, but names, teams that stand out.
Yeah, well, first of all, the 4 teams that I have making a playoff this year, not really going out on the limb with Georgia. Georgia has actually got a better defense than last year. I mean, last year when I went over the team at the coaches, they had lost 9 draft picks last year. There was questions, experience-wise, how they were going to be. This year, no such questions. They only lose 5 draft picks, which is a lot, but they rotate a lot of players. They go 3 deep, and there's no questions experience-wise on defense. Offensively, they have a new quarterback, but Carson Beck's been in the system for 4 years. They have my number 1 rated offensive line. They added in Mississippi State's top receiver. They added in Missouri's top receiver to go along with Brock Bowers, the John Mackey Award winner, Oscar Delpa, tight end. So they're loaded. They're going to actually be a double-digit favorite in every single game this year, with the exception of maybe Tennessee on November the 18th, where they might only be a touchdown favorite. And then another team I have making the playoff, and this is one where on paper I wouldn't normally put them there. It's Alabama. Alabama's only number 127 on my experience chart, one of the least experienced teams in the country, 5 starters back on offense, 5 on defense. They don't even know who their quarterback's going to be. Is it going to be Tyler Buckner, Jalen Milroe, Ty Simpson? A lot of big question marks there. But there's this guy, Nick Saban, that's walking the sidelines. He's brought in the recruiting classes each and every year. And you go back and look at when he's been preseason number 1, like they've been the last 2 years, he's only won 1 national title. But make him not preseason number 1. Say his program's in a rebuilding stage, like 2020 when they entered season number 3. Guess what? They went 13-0 and won the national title. They get Texas at home. They get LSU at home. Probably the toughest game on their schedule is at Texas A&M. That's a really tricky one. I've got A&M, my number 1 most improved team in the country. But I think Nick Saban somehow, some way, cobbles his way back into the playoff. And then do you want to play Alabama in a playoff game with Nick Saban on the other sidelines? That would make it pretty tough. And then so I've got Michigan, Georgia, Alabama, and Clemson as my playoff teams this year. Number 1 most improved team is Texas A&M. And watch out for Jimbo Fisher's squad, because Texas A&M was 5-7 last year, as you recall. However, when I went over the team with Coach Fisher last year, a lot of the positions we talked about, like offensive line, he'd say, Phil, we're going to have one of the best offensive lines in the country next year, because they were only number 124 in my experience chart, one of the least experienced teams in the country. Well, this year, they're number 14. And while they were 5-7 last year with that inexperienced squad, and this year have 10 starters back on offense, 10 on defense, keep in mind that they beat LSU last year, 38-23. And against Bama on the road, they're at the 2-yard line at the end of the game, down by 4 points, throwing in the end zone with a chance to win that game. They could have beat both Alabama and LSU. You know, they've recruited on the level of Alabama, LSU, and Ohio State the last few years. I think A&M's flying way under the radar. Bobby Petrino's their new offensive coordinator, and I think they're going to have a great season this year, a much improved year. And then for the Heisman, the one thing I'll be betting on this year is if it was Caleb Williams or the field, I'll take the field. Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons that we have not had a repeat winner in the Heisman Trophy since the only one's been Archie Griffin would be the fact that not only is Caleb Williams competing against every other player in the country, he's competing against himself. And last year he threw for 4,500 yards, hit 67% of his passes, had 42 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions. Now, if those numbers are anything less than that, people will say he had a down year, even though he could have a phenomenal year, just not what he did last season. So I think that the players would be the main competition. Might be a guy like the Pac-12 is loaded with Michael Penix, Bo Nix, Joe Milton from Tennessee, J.J. McCarthy from Michigan. As mentioned, you can throw Kyle McCord for Ohio State in there. My two long shots I like the best are Sam Hartman and Notre Dame. He's at about 18-1 right now. I think Sam Hartman's got a really good supporting cast. He's one of the better quarterbacks in the country. And then Carson Beck of Georgia, because if you're the number one quarterback for the number one team and your team's beating everybody and you're putting up good stats, you got a really good chance of winning the Heisman. Those would be probably my two dark horse candidates to win the Heisman this year.
So, Phil, college football has changed a lot over the last several years. The NIL, the transfer portal, realignment, among many, many others. Do you think these changes are good? They've occurred, seems like, pretty rapidly. Do you think they're all good? What's your opinion on all that?
Yeah, well, NIL is not really NIL. I mean, in theory, let's get the players to benefit from name, image, and likeness. What it's turned into is, okay, here's $500,000, come play for our school, or $40,000, or whatever they're offering nowadays. So I'm not wild about the NIL if they could somehow put reins on it. And then the transfer portal, just speaking for me and the coaches I talk to, it just makes things a lot more hectic. You don't know if your kid's going to be there next year. And in my case, we used to go to the press in May for the magazine, and now we go to the press June 7th because we have to capture all the transfer portal moves. We're making changes June 6th, players landing and things like that. So the transfer portal's made it tougher for me and for the head coaches. But you've got to adapt in this world, and so that's what we're doing. We're adapting much like the college head coaches are.
Do you like the realignment, especially with the Big Ten getting USC and UCLA next year?
I'm old school. Being from the Midwest, I like the fact that, it used to be the Big Ten versus the Pac-12 in the Rose Bowl every year, and now USC and UCLA are playing conference games. However, first year of the magazine was 1995. I had the Southwest Conference in there. Texas moved to the Big 8, became the Big 12, and, things adapted. So it was tough to deal with at the moment, but then you just sort of adapt and roll with it.
So, Phil, do you think the Big Ten will add more teams? Oregon, Washington, Florida State. Do you think they'll add any more teams here in the next couple of years?
That's a great question. It appears they might, but when you take a look at the current market, I can tell you that when Texas and Oklahoma left the Big 12 a couple of years ago, guys, I thought they were toast. Mm-hmm. The Big 12 is going to disband. The Pac-12 is going to absorb it. The Big 10 is going to take some teams. The SEC, forget about the Big 12. Now look at the Big 12. They're actually taking the Pac-12 over, and you think the Pac-12 is going to go out of business. I honestly don't know. If you would ask me 3 years ago, are USC and UCLA going to play in the Big 10? I would have been no. Is Texas and Oklahoma going to go to the SEC? No. Expect the unexpected when it comes to the teams moving.
I've always been one, being a Midwest guy, as you both are. Why isn't Notre Dame in the Big Ten? Obviously, it's a TV contract, but the independence thing is such an old school thing in football. At some point, don't you think Notre Dame's going to have to slide into a conference?
You would think they would eventually. That they are so fiercely independent right now, and as long as they're included in all the conversations, like as long as they can make the playoff, as long as they can have their own TV contract, etc., then they're happy with where they're at. And watch out for Notre Dame this year. I'll tell you what, with Sam Hartman at quarterback, a loaded running back room led by Audric Estime, an offensive line that's a veteran group, one of the better defenses in the country, and a great special teams. I rated number 6 there. They are going to be a threat to play in the playoff this year.
You bring up Notre Dame, Phil, and with Ohio State's game last year in Columbus being so tight and close, and with the new quarterback for both teams, really, and Notre Dame having loads of talent, as does Ohio State. At this time, the Buckeyes got to go to South Bend. Do you see Ohio State losing that game? I know it's early, and training camp really hasn't got underway yet, but is that a game early in the season that you could see the Buckeyes faulting?
Yeah, it is one of those toss-up games on the Ohio State schedule. One of the reasons I didn't pick Ohio State to make the playoff this year, because they've got the 3 truly tough road tests. Now, right now, Ohio State's about an 8.5-point favorite in Vegas, but I put the number closer to pick them to 3 points. I think that's a true toss-up game.
Yeah, I think with the expansion coming to the Big Ten and the expanded playoff, schools like Ohio State will be playing bigger schools out of conference teams, like Ohio State's future schedule is looking. You got to think some of the Big Ten schools like a Michigan or like a Wisconsin would probably do the same by scheduling teams like a Texas or an Oklahoma or Georgia or Alabama, and the future schedules looking like 5-10 years out.
I would agree with that. I think that it makes it a lot. I mean, you could definitely lose a couple of games and still make the playoff. And so that will make, I think, for better non-conference schedules during the season. The only thing I worry about is Ohio State playing Michigan at the end of the year. They're both undefeated. You're both going to make the playoffs. Do you rest players to get ready for the playoff?
Yeah.
It's really what you do in the last bunch, and you may just meet Michigan again, or meet Ohio State again in the playoff.
All right, Phil, I've always wondered this because of your, 10 months of making this magazine. I know you're glued to the TV every Saturday. So explain to our listeners and to Scott and me, what does a Saturday look like in the fall in the Phil Steele household? How many games are you watching? How many TVs do you have set up? What are you eating? What are you drinking?
Well, a lot of Diet Mountain Dew for starters. Right in front of my desk here, I've got 12 TVs. So I am actually watching 12 games all day long. Do not come into the office and interrupt me because I am focused. And the good thing is, if you're watching the 12 games, there's usually only 2 or 3 plays going on at a time. And while I might not be able to go to the grocery store and get out of there paying at the cash register and all that stuff, I can actually absorb 12 games at a time and keep track of what's going on in them. But you have to be fully focused. Diet Mountain Dew is the main source that I have during that Saturday. At 3 o'clock in the morning when that damn Hawaii game ends.
Pac-12 after dark. So you're the king of multitasking then.
Yes, I would put it at that. Yes, I can definitely tell you if you walked in the office at the halftime, let's say, and if the games were all ending at the same time at halftime at the same time, and said what happened in that game, I could pretty much go play-by-play with you, or drive-by-drive with you at least.
All right, Phil, being a Cleveland native, did you have a college team you rooted for growing up?
Yeah, growing up, I was an Ohio State fan, no doubt about it.
Okay.
Rooted for the Buckeyes, lived and died, and Woody Hayes. Huge fan of the Buckeyes with Woody Hayes. Now I do have a favorite team every year. There's no doubt about it. My favorite team is whoever I pick higher than everybody else. So this year, my number 1 surprise team is Wisconsin. My number 2 surprise team is Texas A&M. I am a Badger fan. I am an Aggie fan because I want the magazine to do well. So those are the teams I'm rooting for the most. So can't afford to be aligned with anybody except who you pick.
So I assume, Phil, with you being a Cleveland native and still residing here in the suburbs, were you a Browns fan growing up, and are you still a Browns fan? Do you follow the NFL much?
I am still a Browns fan, but I actually don't follow the NFL. I just stopped that maybe 2 years ago. What I do on Sundays is I've just watched 12 games all at one time. Now I like to watch the actual broadcast, listen to the announcers. So I watch taped college football games all day long on Sunday. Maybe if the Browns are getting towards the playoffs again, I may come back and start watching the NFL as far as the Browns go, but I'll wait until then.
With all your TV set up and your Saturdays consumed in the fall, how has your wife been able to okay this over the last 30-some years?
Yeah, that's the amazing thing, and it's I guess you live in a nice place. Let's just put it that way. So it's new coming in what the situation was.
Wow. Phil, this has been a pleasure. I mean, the amount of information you gave us in our, how long have we been talking here? Maybe 30 minutes or so has been unreal. The density of the information, it's just unreal. I mean, John, I can't remember a guest or anybody I've talked to in a long time who's been able to give us that much information in that short a period of time.
Yeah, you can tell, Scott and Phil, this is coming right off of your head. You're not reading anything. You're just spitting out, stats or players that, from smaller schools, big schools that maybe people haven't heard of. It just goes to the depth of your research and your skill set, Phil.
I really appreciate that, guys. Well, once again, it's all I work on all year long. So you take me outside of the college football world, and then you wouldn't be as impressed.
Phil, thank you so much for joining us, everybody. You can buy Phil Steele's College Football 2023 College Football Preview magazine on newsstands now. Every college football team at the D1 level, from the Big Ten to the MAC, Ivy League. Phil, did I miss anything there?
Yeah, and it's only available at Barnes & Noble and Books A Million this year, so don't waste your gas money looking for it. 352 pages. It's like getting 133 media guides rolled into one. Barnes & Noble, Books A Million are your 2 exclusive dealers this year. Or you can go to philsteele.com and get the magazine as well.
Awesome. And you can also follow Phil on Twitter at PhilSteele042. Phil Steele, Phil, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us. And we're so proud that you were the very first We're the very first Cleveland media outlet to interview you this young football season.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. We should do this more often, guys, because I had a heck of a lot of fun talking to you guys today.
Yeah, we'll definitely do it. We'll make it like an annual thing every summer into the fall. That's for sure, Phil. Thank you so much for your time.
Sounds great. Great. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Take care, Phil. That's the legendary Phil Steele. Again, go check out his college football preview magazine on newsstands now, Barnes & Noble. You can, again, download the digital copy there on philsteele.com. Well, Scott, that was a wealth of knowledge right there in such a short amount of time.
It really was. I mean, like you said, the fact that he could rattle this stuff off the top of his head and not miss a beat was impressive. Extremely impressive. Of course, you can follow all of our... Boy, John, I'm kind of out of practice because we haven't done a podcast in a little while, but you can follow us on Press Play Podcast. You can follow me on Twitter, Scott Sable, FOX8.
Yeah, you can follow the pod at Sable Brothers on Twitter. Like and subscribe on Spotify and Apple. Follow yours truly at John_Sable.
Have a great day, everybody. We'll talk to you soon.